My name is Eleanor Price. I am 74 years old, and tonight I am speaking to you with tears in my eyes and a heart so heavy I can hardly hold it inside my chest because the people I gave my life to, the very children I carried, raised, and sacrificed for, have turned me into a stranger in my own family. And before I even begin to tell you what they have done, I want to ask you, my dear listeners, to please subscribe to this channel, to leave a comment, to share this story. Because I know I am not the only mother and grandmother who has been treated like a burden instead of a blessing. And if my voice shakes or if my tears fall as I speak, I wanted to reach those who might be sitting in silence thinking they are alone, because you are not, and I am not. But sometimes it feels like we are invisible, like our years of love and sacrifice get erased by entitlement, by greed, by the coldness of those we once thought would protect us when we grew old. Yet here I am, trembling, trying to understand how my daughter, my son, my daughter-in-law, and my son-in-law could look me in the face and treat me as though I were nothing more than an inconvenience, an obstacle, or worse, a piece of property to manage and discard. And the pain of it eats at me like rust on old iron, slow but relentless, corroding the last pieces of dignity I thought I had left. It all began, I suppose, the day my daughter Rebecca looked at me across her perfect suburban dining room table, where I had cooked half the dishes and folded the napkins with shaking arthritic hands, and she said without hesitation, "Mom, you'll eat after everyone else. We need to make sure the kids and guests are settled first." And I felt something inside me crack, not a loud shatter. No, it was quieter, like the sound of ice splintering under slow pressure, a clean, devastating break that left me sitting there stunned, my mouth dry, my throat aching. Because in that moment I understood that she did not see me as her mother, the woman who worked 2 jobs to pay her college tuition, who went without new clothes so she could wear prom dresses and join cheerleading camps, who stayed up countless nights sewing Halloween costumes and wiping away her fevers. No, she saw me as staff, as someone to serve and then step aside, as if I had aged into a servant, unworthy of sitting at the table I once ruled with laughter, discipline, and love. And as I sat there, I glanced toward my son Matthew, who should have spoken up, who should have said, "That's not right, let Mom sit with us." But he only laughed weakly and kept eating, his wife Danielle whispering something in his ear, and smirking at me like I was a joke she'd already told her friends. And across from them sat my son-in-law Anthony, who had the audacity to pour himself more wine and say, "Rebecca's right, Eleanor, you should rest. You've done enough. Let us handle this." But his words dripped with that false sweetness people use when they want to disguise control as kindness. And I felt my eyes burn, not only from shame, but from the realization that they had been working together for months, maybe even years, to push me out of my own place in the family. I wanted to scream, to pound the table, to demand, "What have I done to deserve this?" But no one would have cared. The forks clinked against plates, the children laughed, the conversations flowed, and I sat there as though I were already gone, like a ghost in the room no one bothered to acknowledge. I thought of the roast I had prepared myself earlier that week, marinated for hours, roasted slowly with rosemary and garlic, and how none of them had even thanked me. And suddenly I remembered the feeling of holding that tray in my hands, heavy and hot, walking through the cold night air, alone, carrying not just food, but the last remnants of my pride back to my small house where no one was waiting, and I ate in silence at my chipped blue-rimmed plate, each bite tasting of sorrow, but also of freedom, because at least it was mine. At least no one could take that from me. And as I sit here telling you this now, I realize that was the night the truth finally came clear. My children do not love me for who I am. They tolerate me for what I can give, and the moment I stop giving, they push me into a corner like an old chair gathering dust. I cannot stop crying when I think of it, because I was not always this way. I was once strong, independent, capable. I raised them without their father after he left us. I cleaned houses by day and worked at a diner by night, my hands raw, my feet swollen, but my spirit unbroken. And I swore to myself my children would never feel hunger, never feel the humiliation I did when I stood in line for food stamps in the bitter Chicago winter. And yet, here I am, humiliated still, not by poverty, but by my own flesh and blood. And that pain is worse than any hunger, worse than any cold, because you cannot buy love back once it is gone. You cannot plead dignity into existence once it has been stripped from you. I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window that night, the lines etched deep into my skin, the tired eyes staring back, and I whispered to myself, "Eleanor, you are still alive, you are still yours." But even as I said it, I knew it would not be easy, because tomorrow Rebecca would call demanding explanations. Matthew would send Danielle to guilt me with her sugary tone. Anthony would glare at me like I was a disobedient child. And all of them would remind me that without them, I was nothing. And yet deep down, I felt a fire spark, small, trembling, but real, telling me that maybe, just maybe, I still had one chance to reclaim myself, even if it meant losing them forever. And that is why I am here, pouring my story into this microphone, crying not just for what they have done, but for what I must now decide to do, because this is only the beginning. And if you are listening, please stay with me until the end, because what comes next will make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and love. The morning after that humiliating dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with my head in my hands, the smell of cold coffee lingering in the air, and I thought about every moment that had led me to this breaking point. Because it wasn't just one dinner, it wasn't just one cruel sentence. It was years of small cuts, years of dismissals and whispers, years of being told subtly and sometimes not so subtly that I was no longer useful, no longer relevant, that I should sit down, stay quiet, and let them run things. And yet, it wasn't always this way, for once upon a time my children clung to me for warmth, for guidance, for survival, and now they toss me aside like an old coat no longer fashionable enough to wear. I stared out the window at the maple tree in my yard, the same one I had planted with my late husband Robert decades ago, when our hands were young and strong, before his heart gave out and left me to raise 2 children alone, and I remembered the way Rebecca used to bring me flowers from that tree, bright red leaves pressed into my palms like treasures, and Matthew used to climb it, his laughter echoing across the yard while I stood below warning him not to go too high. But those children are gone, replaced by adults whose voices sound like strangers, voices dripping with judgment and entitlement, and I can't help but wonder where I failed, where along the line I lost them, or maybe I never really had them at all. Maybe I just poured myself into empty cups thinking they were filling, when in reality they were draining me dry. The phone rang that morning, and sure enough, it was Rebecca, her name flashing across the screen like a warning bell. And I let it ring once, twice, before I finally answered, my voice trembling but steady enough to say hello. And she wasted no time, her tone sharp as vinegar. "Mom, you embarrassed me last night, walking out like that with the food. Do you have any idea how that made me look in front of everyone?" And I sat there stunned, because even now she wasn't apologizing. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She wasn't worried about me, only about appearances, only about her reputation as the perfect hostess in her picture-perfect suburban world. And when I tried to speak, she cut me off. Anthony said it was disrespectful. Danielle agrees. And Matthew is hurt too. "You've caused a lot of tension. You need to come back here and explain yourself." And something in me hardened. A steel I hadn't felt in years rose up, and I told her calmly, "Rebecca, I don't owe you or anyone an explanation. I took what was mine, and I left." And the silence that followed was thick, heavy, like a storm waiting to burst, before she hissed back, "If you keep acting like this, don't be surprised if we start making decisions without you. Maybe it's time someone else takes control of your finances and your house, since you clearly can't handle yourself anymore." And my stomach dropped, because in that moment I understood their game, the whispers, the dismissals, the subtle moves. This was about power, about control, about money, about everything I had worked for in this life. And suddenly I saw the cage they had been quietly building around me for years, disguised as help, disguised as care, but really a way to strip me of independence until I had nothing left but what they allowed me, and tears rolled hot down my cheeks as I whispered, "You wouldn't dare." But Rebecca only laughed bitterly and said, "Oh, Mom, it's not about daring. It's about what's best for you. You should be thanking us." And before I could reply, she hung up, leaving me staring at the dead phone in my hand, shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I sat in that silence for what felt like hours, my mind racing, my heart pounding, because I realized they weren't just cruel. They were planning something bigger, something that could leave me stripped of everything. And I thought of my granddaughter, Emily, sweet Emily, Rebecca's daughter, who had always been gentle with me, who came to me when she was younger with her secrets, who still visited sometimes when her mother wasn't paying attention, and I prayed she would see through the lies, that she would not be poisoned against me, because she was my last light in this darkness, the only one who seemed to remember that I was human. As the day wore on, I found myself digging through drawers I hadn't opened in years, searching for my documents, my will, my bank papers, anything that proved that my life was still mine, because I couldn't trust them anymore. Not with my money, not with my future, not even with the roof over my head. And as I spread those papers across the table, my tears fell onto the ink, blurring the words. But my resolve sharpened. I whispered to myself, "Eleanor, you have been silent too long. You've been polite too long, and look where it got you. Alone, disrespected, treated like a servant in your own family. Well, no more. Not now, not ever again." And even as my chest ached and my body trembled, I knew that the fight for my dignity was just beginning, and that whatever came next would not be easy. Because my daughter, my son, my daughter-in-law, and my son-in-law were not just ungrateful. They were predators dressed in family clothing, and I would have to face them head-on before they stripped me of everything I still had left. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Rebecca's voice telling me I should be thankful for their control, and I tossed and turned in the bed that used to be a refuge, staring at the ceiling in the dark, whispering prayers that somehow I could find the strength to stand against my own children. But by morning, I realized prayer alone would not be enough. I needed action. I needed proof. And most of all, I needed to know exactly what they were planning, because I had lived long enough to understand that cruelty dressed as kindness rarely stopped at words. It became paperwork, signatures, backroom conversations with lawyers and banks, and the thought of them stripping away the house Robert and I built with our hands, the little savings I had scraped together cleaning houses and waiting tables. It made my stomach twist until I felt physically sick. So I got up, made myself a pot of tea, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing down everything I remembered. Moments when Rebecca had insisted on handling my mail, times when Matthew asked me to sign routine forms, Danielle's endless suggestions that I just put everything into their name for convenience, and Anthony's sly remarks about how elderly parents often become too confused to manage finances. And as I wrote, the pieces began to form a terrible picture, a slow, calculated attempt to convince me I was incompetent so they could swoop in and claim the very things I had spent a lifetime protecting. My hands shook as I flipped through my files, and to my horror, I found statements with their names listed as secondary contacts, small withdrawals I hadn't made, automatic transfers I never approved, all dressed up as helpful arrangements, but, in truth, theft hidden in plain sight. And I broke down right there, sobbing into my hands, because I could not believe the children I raised, the ones I went without food to feed, the ones I stayed awake for when fevers kept them up at night, were stealing from me inch by inch. And I thought of the nights I worked double shifts at the diner, grease clinging to my skin, so Rebecca could go on school trips, and Matthew could have new baseball shoes. And I thought of how many times I told myself it was worth it, that one day they would love me enough to care for me in return. But now I saw the truth, that they loved the comfort my sacrifices gave them. Not me, never me, and that realization shattered me in a way I can barely put into words. The phone rang again that morning, this time Matthew's number flashing, and for a moment I almost didn't answer. But then I thought I needed to hear his voice, needed to see if there was any trace of the boy I once held close. So I picked up, and he launched right in, his tone brisk, businesslike. "Mom, Danielle and I have been talking. And we think it's time to streamline things for you. You know, take some pressure off. If you sign over power of attorney, we can handle the bills, the accounts, all of it. You won't have to worry anymore. And I sat there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to steady my voice as I asked, "And what if I don't want that, Matthew?" And he sighed like a man tolerating a child. "Mom, it's not really about what you want. It's about what you need. You're 74. You forget things. You get confused. This is for your own good." And my tears spilled over as I whispered, "I raised you better than this." But he just grew cold. "Maybe you did, but this is the reality now. And you can fight it if you want. But the courts usually side with the kids when the parent is clearly struggling." And then he hung up, leaving me trembling so hard I nearly dropped the receiver. I sat there in silence, the sound of the ticking clock filling the room. And for the first time in years, I felt real fear. Not of being alone, not of growing old, but of being erased. Erased from my own life. Erased by the very people I gave everything to, and in that moment I thought of Emily, sweet Emily, and I decided I had to call her. I had to tell her the truth before they filled her ears with lies. So I dialed her number, my heart pounding, and when her soft voice answered, "Grandma?" I broke, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. "Emily, sweetheart, I need you. They're trying to take everything from me, your mother, your uncle, all of them. They want my house, my savings. They want me out of the way." And there was silence for a moment before she whispered, "I knew it. I've seen the way they talk about you when you're not around. I never believed them, Grandma. I believe you." And I cried harder, because for the first time, I felt seen, truly seen. And she said, "Don't worry, we'll figure this out. Together, I'll come by after work. Just promise me you won't sign anything." And I promised, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline, because in many ways it was. After we hung up, I wiped my face and looked at the papers on the table, the evidence of betrayal scattered like ashes. And I swore to myself that I would not go quietly. I would not let them steal the last years of my life, because even if I had to fight with my last breath, I would fight. And as the sun dipped low that evening, and I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, I knew this was just the beginning of a war I never thought I'd have to fight. A war not against strangers, but against my own blood, and I could not shake the question that echoed in my mind. How do you survive when the people you loved most become the enemy? When Emily arrived the next evening, I nearly collapsed into her arms, my tears soaking into her jacket as she whispered over and over, "It's okay, Grandma. I'm here. I believe you." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. The kind of safety that doesn't come from walls or locks, but from knowing someone truly stands on your side. And when she pulled back and looked me in the eye, I saw not just my granddaughter, but the echo of her mother, my Rebecca, before the bitterness set in. The Rebecca who used to braid my hair and giggle when I told her bedtime stories. And it pierced me to realize how far she had drifted. But Emily wiped my tears and said firmly, "Tell me everything." So we sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had held bills and birthday, cakes and grief in equal measure, and I laid it all bare, the humiliations, the stolen decisions, the phone calls dripping with manipulation, the threats of legal action, and Emily listened without flinching, her jaw tightening, her hands clenching into fists until finally she said, "I've suspected for a while, Grandma. Mom talks about you like you're a problem to be managed, not a person. And Uncle Matthew, he brags sometimes about how it'll all be easier once everything is in their name." I thought he was exaggerating, but now I see he wasn't. And my chest ached as I realized how blind I had been, how much I had ignored because I wanted to keep the peace. But now peace was gone. And Emily leaned forward, her eyes sharp with determination. "They can't do this to you, Grandma. Not while I'm around. We'll fight back. But first we need proof. Real proof. Not just your word, because people like them, they'll twist the story, they'll paint you as confused, forgetful, they'll say you're not capable, and we can't let them win." And I nodded, feeling the spark of hope in her words. though it was dimmed by the fear still gnawing inside me, the fear that maybe she was too young, too kind, to stand against her own parents. But she squeezed my hand tight and whispered, "You've carried this family your whole life, Grandma. Now let me carry you for once." And I broke all over again, sobbing into her shoulder. That night, she pulled out her laptop and began combing through my papers, her fingers flying across the keys, cross-checking transactions, highlighting discrepancies. And she gasped when she saw the recurring withdrawals, the strange charges, the accounts I hadn't known about. "They've been bleeding you slowly," she said, fury in her voice. "But it's all here. Every line tells a story, and we'll make sure someone listens." And as I watched her, so focused, so fierce, I thought of Grace, my late daughter, Emily's mother, who had always been the gentle one, the one who checked on me even when she was tired, who never raised her voice but always made her point clear. And I felt her presence in that room, as if she were guiding, Emily's hands whispering through her, carrying on the love that Rebecca had buried under ambition and resentment. By the time Emily left that night, we had gathered a stack of evidence, copies of bank statements, letters, and notes, all tucked into a folder she pressed into my hands. "Keep this safe, Grandma. Hide it if you have to. Don't let them near it." And I promised, tucking it into the drawer with my old recipe cards and flashlight, the place no one thought to look. And as she kissed my cheek goodbye, she said, "I'll be back tomorrow. Don't answer any of their calls until then." And for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, my dreams filled not with fear, but with a strange kind of courage. But of course, courage does not go untested, and the very next morning, there was a knock at my door, sharp, insistent, and when I opened it, there stood Danielle, my daughter-in-law, her smile too wide, her perfume too strong, holding a casserole, dish like some peace offering, but her eyes betrayed her, hard, calculating, cold, and she said sweetly, "Eleanor, we've been worried about you. You haven't been answering the phone, and Matthew asked me to come check on you. Isn't that kind?" And I stood there, gripping the doorframe, forcing my lips to curve into something resembling a polite smile, because I knew her game. I knew this wasn't about kindness. This was reconnaissance, to see if I was breaking, to see if I'd hand over what they wanted. So I let her in, though every nerve in my body screamed not to, and she set the casserole on the counter, glancing at the stacks of paper on the table, her eyes flickering with recognition before she smoothed her expression. "Oh, looks like you've been busy. Paperwork can be so overwhelming at your age, don't you think? Maybe it's time to let Matthew and Rebecca handle all this. They just want to help, you know?" And my chest tightened, my tears threatening, but I swallowed them down, forcing my voice to steady as I said, "Danielle, I may be old, but I'm not helpless, and I do not need your help with my life." And for a moment, her smile faltered, her mask slipped, and I saw the irritation flash across her face before she quickly covered it with that sugary tone. "Of course, Eleanor, no pressure. Just remember, we're here for you." And then she left, her heels clicking against the floor like hammers, driving nails into a coffin, and when the door shut behind her, I collapsed into the chair, my hands shaking, because I knew they were watching me, circling like vultures, and that this fight was far from over. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. Emily was right, with proof, with resolve, with the courage I thought I had lost. I could fight them, and I would, even if it meant tearing my family apart, because what they were trying to do to me was not love, it was theft, and I would not die as their victim, not while I still had breath to tell my story. The next morning, Emily arrived earlier than usual, her hair still damp from the shower, a coffee in one hand, and determination in her eyes, and she said without hesitation, "Grandma, we're going to see a lawyer today. You can't wait. You can't let them corner you any longer." And though my heart pounded at the thought, my first instinct was to resist, because going to a lawyer made it real. It meant acknowledging that my own children were plotting against me. But Emily took my trembling hand and whispered, "They've already made it real, Grandma. We're just catching up." And something in her voice broke through the fear. So I nodded, dressed in my navy cardigan and sturdy shoes, the ones that made me feel put together. And we took the bus downtown together, the city streets buzzing with life in a way I hadn't felt part of in years. And when we entered the office of Mr. Hayes, a gray-haired attorney with kind eyes behind thick glasses, I felt a wave of shame wash over me. Because how had I? A woman who once managed a household on pennies, who kept a roof over her children's heads through sheer will, ended up here, begging for protection from those same children. But Mr. Hayes listened patiently as Emily laid out the documents, the suspicious withdrawals, the attempts at manipulation, the threats, and when I finally found the courage to speak, my voice cracked as I confessed. They want to take everything from me, Mr. Hayes, my home, my savings, my name, and I don't know how to stop them. And he leaned forward, his voice steady and calm. Mrs. Price, you still have every legal right to your property and accounts. As long as you act now, we can put protections in place. We can revoke any access they've gained. We can set up a trust that ensures your wishes are honored. But you need to be strong, because this will anger them. And my tears spilled as I whispered, They'll hate me. But Emily squeezed my hand and said firmly, They already treat you like they do, Grandma. What you need now is respect, not approval. And I knew she was right. By the time we left that office, we had begun the process of creating a living trust in my name with Emily as the beneficiary. We had drafted a revocation of power of attorney, and Mr. Hayes promised to notify the banks immediately to block any unauthorized access, and though my body trembled from exhaustion, I felt a strange surge of power I hadn't felt in years, the knowledge that for once I wasn't just enduring, I was fighting back. But that evening, the fight came knocking at my door in the form of my son-in-law Anthony, his face red, his jaw clenched, barging into my house without even waiting for me to invite him in, slamming the door behind him, his voice booming, What the hell do you think you're doing, Eleanor? Do you know how reckless this is? And I froze in fear, but he towered over me, spitting words like venom. Rebecca told me everything. You're trying to cut us out. After everything we've done for you, after all the bills we've covered, the roof we've given you, this is how you repay us. And something inside me snapped. The years of silence, the swallowed pride, the endless humiliations rising up, and I stood as tall as my shaking legs would allow and shouted back through tears, You have never done anything for me out of love. You've only ever taken, and I will not let you take the rest of me. And for the first time, Anthony looked caught off guard, his eyes narrowing as if he couldn't believe I had found my voice. But before he could reply, Emily came through the door, her face pale with fury as she stepped between us, her voice sharp as a blade. Get out of her house now. And though Anthony laughed at her at first, mocking, What are you going to do, little girl? Emily didn't flinch. She pulled out her phone and said, Call the police, Grandma. Tell them he's trespassing. Tell them he's threatening you. I'll back you up. And the sight of her unwavering stare must have startled him, because after a tense moment he sneered, muttered, You'll regret this, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. When the silence settled again, my knees gave out, and Emily caught me, holding me close as I sobbed. I can't believe it's come to this. My own family threatening me in my own home. And Emily whispered fiercely, It's not family. When they treat you this way, Grandma, family doesn't break you down to build themselves up. And her words pierced the fog of grief, because deep down I knew she was right. But it still shattered me to admit that the people I had carried in my body, fed with my hands, and prayed for every night had become my enemies. And as I lay in bed later that night, clutching the folder of legal papers like a lifeline, I realized that this battle was no longer just about saving money or a house. It was about saving myself, my dignity, my identity, and if they wanted war, then for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight back, even if it meant standing alone with only Emily by my side, because I would rather die fighting for my worth than live one more day being treated like I was disposable. 2 days later, the storm I had feared finally arrived in full, because Rebecca and Matthew came together, dragging Danielle and Anthony with them, pounding on my door so loudly the neighbors peeked through their curtains, and when I finally opened it, my heart racing, they all barged in without permission, their faces twisted with rage, their voices a chorus of accusations that made my living room feel like a courtroom where I was already sentenced guilty. Rebecca pointing a finger at me and shouting, "How dare you go behind our backs, Mom? Hiring lawyers, setting up trusts, cutting us out like we're strangers, after all we've done for you? And Matthew chiming in, his voice low but venomous. This isn't just selfish. It's cruel. You're tearing this family apart. And Danielle added her shrill edge. You're not thinking clearly, Eleanor. You're being manipulated, probably by Emily. She's turning you against us. She's a child. She doesn't know what's best for you. And Anthony, towering as always, barked, You're making a huge mistake, one that you'll regret when you're all alone and no one's there to help you. And I stood there, trembling, my tears spilling freely, trying to find my voice while 4 pairs of eyes drilled into me, and for a moment I almost caved, almost said yes, take it all. Just stop screaming. Stop hating me. But then I remembered Emily's words, that family doesn't break you down to build themselves up. And I straightened my back as much as my frail body would allow and said through sobs, I am not your servant. I am not your burden. I am your mother, and I have the right to live my life in peace without being controlled like a puppet. And the room fell into stunned silence for just a breath before Rebecca exploded again. Peace? You think peace comes from cutting your children out of your will? From embarrassing us in front of everyone? You've lost your mind, Mom. You're letting bitterness drive you. But I shook my head, my tears streaming, but my voice steady now. No, Rebecca. Bitterness didn't bring me here, you did. All of you. Every dismissal, every insult, every time you made me feel like a stranger in my own family. You pushed me to this. And I will not apologize for finally protecting myself. And before they could reply, Emily burst through the door, her face blazing with fury, as she threw her bag on the table and stood between me and them, her voice clear and sharp. Leave. Her alone, she doesn't owe you anything. You've leeched off her long enough. And Rebecca's face twisted as she hissed, Emily, stay out of this. You don't understand. This is family business. And Emily snapped back, exactly. And that's why I won't stay out. Because family is supposed to love, not rob, not manipulate, not destroy. And if this is what family looks like, then maybe we need to redefine the word? And I watched, stunned and proud, as my granddaughter defended me with more courage than I thought possible. While Matthew rolled his eyes and muttered, You've brainwashed her? Mom, you've poisoned her against us. But Emily turned on him, her voice trembling with rage. No, you did that yourselves every time you treated her like she didn't matter. Every time you talked about her like she was an inconvenience. I was there. I heard it. And I will never forget it. And Matthew faltered, his mouth opening and closing without words, while Danielle tried to regain control. This is ridiculous, Eleanor. The courts will see through this. They'll see you're being manipulated, and when that happens, you'll lose everything anyway. And my knees nearly buckled at the threat, but Emily reached for my hand, steadying me, her voice unwavering. Not if we show them the truth. Not if we show them the bank records, the transfers, the emails, all of it. We already have proof, Danielle, so go ahead. Take it to court, because when the truth comes out, it won't be my grandmother who looks unfit. It will be all of you. And I swear for the first time I saw fear flash across their faces, just a flicker, quickly buried under anger. But it was there, and it gave me the strength to whisper, You can't erase me. You can't erase what I've built. Not anymore. And Rebecca's face crumpled, not with remorse, but with frustration, as if she had lost control of a game she thought she was winning. And she spat, Fine, Mom. Have it your way. But when you're alone in a hospital bed, when Emily gets tired of babysitting you, don't come crawling back to us. And with that, she stormed out, Matthew close behind, Danielle muttering something about me being pathetic, Anthony slamming the door so hard the walls shook, and then they were gone, leaving the house ringing with silence, my body shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. And I collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably, whispering over and over, How did it come to this? How did my own children become strangers? And Emily knelt beside me, her own tears falling as she cupped my face and whispered, Grandma, don't let their poison in. You are not alone. You have me. And I swear to you, I will never leave you, no matter how ugly this gets. And though my heart was shattered into pieces, In that moment, I believed her, and I clung to her words like a lifeline, knowing the battle was only beginning, but also knowing, maybe for the first time, that I didn't have to fight it alone. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. Every knock at the door made my chest tighten. Every phone ring made my hands shake, because I knew Rebecca and Matthew would not give up easily. And sure enough, the letters started, arriving official-looking envelopes from lawyers they had hired, filled with threats dressed up in legal language, petitions claiming I was unfit to manage my own affairs, motions suggesting they should be appointed guardians over me, and each time I opened one, my knees buckled under the weight of betrayal, because these weren't strangers trying to strip me of my independence. These were my children, the babies I once rocked to sleep, the toddlers I taught to walk, now writing my erasure into cold, printed words, and it made me sick to my stomach. But Emily stood firm, her jaw clenched as she read each letter beside me, her voice steady as she said, "They're bluffing, Grandma. We'll take every one of these to Mr. Hayes. We'll respond with the truth, with the evidence. They can try to scare you, but they don't get to win." And she carried those papers in her backpack like weapons, determined to protect me with them, and I swear, watching her fight for me lit something in me I thought had died long ago, a flame of strength I hadn't felt since the years after Robert died, when I had no choice but to stand tall for my girls. Together we went to Hayes's office, spread every thread across his polished desk, and I sat there sobbing, my hands shaking too badly to hold a pen, whispering, "Why are they doing this to me? Why are they so cruel?" And Hayes leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Because people often mistake love for entitlement, Mrs. Price, and your children have grown used to taking from you without question. Now that you've said no, they feel entitled to destroy you to get what they want. But the law is on your side. You just have to endure the fight." And I nodded, though my tears didn't stop, because enduring was all I had ever done. But now I was enduring with Emily at my side, and that made all the difference. As the weeks dragged on, the battles grew nastier. Rebecca and Matthew showed up at my porch one evening, shouting loud enough for the neighbors to hear, accusing me of being brainwashed, of letting Emily manipulate me into turning against my real family. And the words cut deep, because for a moment, I wondered if I had really turned against them. But Emily shouted right back, "She didn't turn against you. You turned against her years ago when you stopped seeing her as a mother and started seeing her as a wallet." And the rage on their faces when she said that terrified me, because it was the look of people who had been unmasked. And Anthony stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're just a silly old woman being led by a naive girl. You'll regret this when you're left penniless." And I shook so badly I had to grip the railing. But Emily held me tight, whispering, "Don't listen, Grandma. Their threats mean nothing. Their words only have power if you believe them." And I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the shadows pressed close, I lay awake wondering if they would win, if they would find some way to twist the law against me, and the thought of dying as a prisoner to their greed made my chest ache with dread. But then, in one of those long nights, I found myself staring at the ceiling, remembering the woman I used to be, the woman who fixed broken faucets alone, who worked shifts until her feet bled, who never begged for kindness but created her own strength. And I whispered into the dark, "You are still her, Eleanor. You are still here." And with that thought, I got up, pulled out the binder Hayes had given me, and wrote a letter to Emily, clear and simple, telling her exactly where everything was, what the trust meant, what I wanted for my funeral, what I wanted for the house, and most importantly, what I wanted for her. My blessing to live her life without guilt, without fear, without ever bowing to people who try to diminish her, and I folded it carefully, sealing it with trembling hands, because no matter what happened next, I wanted my voice to be heard, even if they silenced me. When Emily came the next morning, I pressed it into her hand and whispered, "For later, in case they take me down." And her eyes filled with tears as she shook her head furiously. "They won't, Grandma. I won't let them, I swear." And I hugged her tighter than ever, praying she was right. Little did I know, the very next week would bring the confrontation that would change everything, because Rebecca and Matthew, unwilling to lose control, filed an emergency petition at the courthouse claiming I was mentally incompetent and demanding immediate guardianship. And when Hayes called to tell us, my heart nearly stopped, because suddenly it wasn't just threats on paper anymore, it was a hearing, a judge, strangers deciding my fate, and I felt myself spiraling, sobbing into Emily's arms. They're going to lock me away. They're going to take everything. But Emily held me, her voice fierce and unyielding. No, Grandma. We'll go in there together. We'll show the truth. We'll make them see who you really are. And though my body shook with terror, in that moment I knew the final battle was coming, and it would either break me completely or free me forever. The morning of the hearing felt like a funeral, the sky gray and heavy with clouds, my chest tight with dread. And as Emily helped me dress in my simple navy dress and pinned my silver brooch to the collar, I kept whispering, I can't do this. I can't face them in front of everyone. But she held my trembling hands and whispered back, You faced worse, Grandma. You survived losing Grandpa. You survived raising 2 kids alone. You survived being humiliated by the very people who should have cherished you. This isn't the end. It's your chance to be heard. And though my tears blurred my vision, I let her guide me into the courthouse, the polished marble floors gleaming under harsh lights, the echo of footsteps making me feel small and exposed, until we reached the courtroom where Rebecca, Matthew, Danielle, and Anthony sat in pressed suits, their faces smug, their eyes full of contempt as they glanced at me like a lost case already decided, and Rebecca actually had the audacity to smile at me, a smile so cold it made my stomach turn, as if to say, Checkmate. But when the judge entered and the proceedings began, Mr. Hayes rose with calm dignity, laying out the documents Emily and I had gathered. The bank withdrawals, the transfers, the emails dripping with entitlement. And as I sat there clutching Emily's hand, I listened as Rebecca's lawyer painted me as a confused old woman manipulated by a naive granddaughter. And Matthew nodded, along solemnly, Danielle wiping fake tears from her eyes, Anthony glaring at me like a predator ready to pounce. And for a moment the shame overwhelmed me, my chest tightening, my throat closing, until the judge turned and asked me directly, Mrs. Price, do you feel capable of making your own decisions? And time stopped, because that was the moment, the one that would decide everything. And I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. But Emily squeezed my hand and whispered, Tell them who you are, Grandma. And I stood, my knees shaking but my back straight, and with tears streaming down my face, I said, Your Honor, I am 74 years old. My body is not what it used to be, but my mind is still mine. I raised these children with my own 2 hands after their father died. I worked until my bones ached. I gave them everything I had, and in return, they have treated me like a burden, like a servant, like someone to be erased. And I will not let them erase me. Not now, not ever. I know what I want. I know who I am. And what I want is simple, to live the rest of my life in peace, with dignity, without being controlled by the very people who should have protected me. And the courtroom was silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy, until Emily stood as well, her voice clear and strong. Your Honor, I've watched my grandmother be belittled, dismissed, and threatened. I've seen the bank records, the manipulation, the endless attempts to steal her independence, and I can tell you she is more capable than anyone gives her credit for. She has taught me what strength looks like. And if you strip her of her rights today, you are not protecting her. You are protecting their greed. And my tears flowed harder because in that moment, I saw Grace. In her, my gentle daughter who always defended me, whose spirit lived on in Emily's fierce eyes. The judge sat back, thoughtful, silent for what felt like an eternity. Then finally spoke. The petition for guardianship is denied. And the words hit me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, warm and blinding. Because in that instant, I knew I was free, and Rebecca gasped audibly, her face draining of color, while Matthew muttered under his breath. Danielle stiffened in fury, and Anthony clenched his fist so tight his knuckles turned white, but none of it mattered, not anymore. Because the law had spoken, the truth had prevailed, and I was no longer their pawn. When the judge added that their attempts to misuse my finances could be investigated further if I chose, their faces twisted in fear, and for the first time in years, I felt taller than all of them, not because I had won some war, but because I had remembered who I was. And as we walked out of that courthouse, Emily holding my arm like I was royalty, the weight lifted from my chest, and I could breathe again, though my heart still ached with grief, because as freeing as it was, I knew I had lost my children for good. And that night, as I sat in my quiet kitchen sipping tea, I wept not just for what they tried to do, but for the love that had died in them long before this day. And I asked myself over and over, how do you mourn children who are still alive? But then Emily called, her voice soft but steady. Grandma, we did it. You did it. You're safe now. And in that moment, I realized maybe I hadn't lost everything. Maybe I had simply shed the ones who had chosen greed over love, and what I gained was truth, dignity, and a granddaughter who refused to let me be erased. And I want to tell you, my dear listeners, if you are hearing this, if you are nodding through tears because you know this story too well, please subscribe, share, and comment, because stories like mine must be told, must be remembered, must be warnings and torches for others, because no one should ever be made to feel like their worth expired with their youth. And as I look at the papers Hayes gave me, the trust, the revocations, the proof that my life is my own again, I whisper to myself, Eleanor, you made it, you survived, but deep in my bones, I know the story isn't over, because Rebecca's last words as she stormed out of that courtroom still echo in my ears. This isn't finished, Mom. You'll regret this. And sometimes late at night, when the house is too quiet, I wonder what she meant, what line she is willing to cross next. And I can't help but leave you with this question that still haunts me. When your own blood becomes your enemy, can you ever truly be safe again?